you're missing the point here. I don't care what happens in the future regarding vaping. One thing I know with great certainty, it is immeasurably, never mind 95%, Michael, it is immeasurably safer than inhaling regular, daily, combustible tobacco.
Hello, world. Welcome to the Vaping Unplugged podcast. Everything you need to know about vaping and tobacco harm reduction.
Hello and welcome to Vaping Unplugged. I'm Michael from the Vapers Alliance, and thank you for joining us again. Today we have a super interesting guest, namely Dr. Garrett McGovern. He is a GP specializing in the treatment of substance misuse. He's the medical director of the Priority Medical Clinic, a private addiction treatment program located in South County, Dublin. So I can guarantee you will learn a lot in this episode. We cover questions like, what is addiction and are vapers addicts? Does vaping work for smoking cessation? What role can pouches play? And at the end, you will even hear about Garrett's take on the status quo of our beloved Manchester United team. So enjoy the episode and have fun. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the next episode of Vaping Unplugged. This time we have a very special guest with us, Dr. Garrett McGovern. Welcome to the show and thank you for joining us. We highly appreciate it. Maybe we get right into it. Let's start with the basics. Who are you? What are you doing? And even more importantly, why are you doing what you're doing?
So my name is Garrett McGovern. I am a GP addiction specialist. So I treat all kind of ranges of addiction, right through from drug, alcohol. I'm also a board member or trustee of the new Nicotine Alliance in Ireland. I'm very proud of that position. And I am a huge advocate of electronic cigarettes as a smoking cessation device. So it fits very nicely with my kind of ethos of harm reduction.
And maybe before we get directly into vaping and e-cigarettes, let me start with a general question I'm always interested in. Addiction itself. How would you define addiction? And would you say a smoker and or a vapor is an addict?
Well, that's a great question. I kind of tend to, there are many different definitions of addiction. We have kind of classifications like ICD-10, DSM-5, which are kind of things that take into account tolerance, they take into account craving, loss of control, using despite harmful effects, social consequences, etc. And I think without a shadow of a doubt, smoking, I kind of look at addiction as kind of dependence with consequences. Like it can be dependent on something, but not necessarily addicted. So a good example is actually electronic cigarettes, because you can take that on a regular basis every day, several times a day, and not be addicted. So the same with people who are prescribed pain medication for, say, cancer. They get a morphine pump. They're not addicted. They just get pain every day to relieve their pain. So, so I would say yes to cigarettes because there are very, very demonstrable harms. And I would say no to vaping. I'm sure it's possible to be addicted to vaping, but I don't tend to see it as rare as hen's teeth, addiction to vaping. So, just taking something regularly doesn't make you addicted. I have patients who are prescribed opiate substitution treatment, so methadone, buprenorphine. They take it every day. They're not addicted. They're on a medication, pharmacotherapy, to help deal with cravings and withdrawal, and a very similar principle actually to vaping. It's designed to keep them away from the harmful endeavor.
And I guess there must be more to it than just simply saying, "Oh, we need nicotine, and therefore we vape." Because if we think about, sometimes I sit for 5 hours in a plane and don't even think about vaping, but as soon as I land, it's the first thing I must do. So it can't be just the substance itself. There must be more. Is it habits as well? Do they play into addiction then, or is that a completely different thing then?
Are you talking about specifically vaping?
Yes and no. I mean, it's in general for addiction. Do habits come into that as well?
They
And
do.
when specifically about vaping, is it more of an habit, a thing we are used to doing, than specifically needing it at this point of time?
Well, I suppose with vaping, the vast majority of people who vape will take nicotine. And I think nicotine, without a shadow of a doubt, look, there's a lot of controversy whether nicotine is habit forming or dependence forming or addictive. But I think people can get withdrawal symptoms if they don't get nicotine. So yeah, but again, I don't know about addicted, because I think taking nicotine regularly doesn't seem to do much harm to people. So yeah, but we could use the word dependent, couldn't we? I mean, we could use the word dependent. We could even use the phrase physically dependent. In other words, if you don't take it, you might not feel so good. And there's no doubt about that with vaping. I mean, if people are denied a long haul flight, there's a possibility that they might feel uncomfortable. There's psychological withdrawal and also very real withdrawal from nicotine. So yeah, but I think it's manageable. And in any case, once they get back into the airport terminal and out into the open, they can vape. It must be very difficult for them. I mean, I often think about that about smokers. It must be very, very tough to get through a flight.
That's why we are very thankful for nicotine pouches nowadays. That helps. That helps. But you mentioned an interesting thing, and I'm always excited when practical GPs are talking about this and the harm of nicotine. We always hear this nowadays as one of the reasons why vaping is supposed to be so dangerous, because of the brain damage it causes in young people. You deal a lot with smokers, and if I think about this argument logically, then smokers' brains should be damaged as well. Do you see any evidence of that smokers are less intelligent or have some brain problems, or I don't know, or does it only apply when it comes to vaping?
Brilliant. Yeah, I've often talked about this myself. I never heard about nicotine and damage to the brain, or nicotine and the developing brain, until e-cigarettes became a thing. I never heard of smokers getting brain damage. All I ever heard about smoking was you're addicted, you got lung diseases, you were at risk of heart disease, lung cancer, etc. But I never heard anything about brain damage. So I think the evidence that nicotine does anything negative to the brain is very, very thin, and a lot of people will actually say it helps them in terms of concentration. It's a stimulant, so it can help people in much the same way caffeine can help them.
So this argument about brain damage in kids when it comes to vaping, if there is no evidence that the same applies to smokers, where do you think this argument comes from? Is there any basis in that? Does nicotine change when vaped compared to smoked?
Yeah, so I think the evidence doesn't come from anywhere. So the evidence, if you want to call it evidence, as far as I know, and I can't find anything really very good on this. I've searched, research databases to find where the evidence is. I have no experiential evidence at all of this. There's many great people, great poets, great technologists, great brain surgeons, you name it, who've been heavy smokers, who've done brilliant things in the world. I think the two things, two answers to your question. One is, as far as I know, the evidence that they cite, and it's usually cited by people who don't like electronic cigarettes, I've never heard it cited by anybody else. Relates to a study, I think it was only one study, where it studied rats and it looked at nicotine changes in the brain, it looked at brain changes. And I say brain changes, not damage. There were some brain changes. Now, I can't find the study, but I've seen reference to it. It's not a very convincing study on a number of levels. One is it doesn't show brain damage, and two is it's not in humans, and three is the results haven't been replicated anywhere else. So the evidence that nicotine affects the developing brain, and as well as that, Michael, so the evidence is very thin. It's absent, really. The other thing I'd say is nicotine replacement therapy, which even people who hate vaping, the vast majority of people who don't like vaping as a smoking cessation device, we haven't talked about the children yet, so that's another issue. They don't like kids taking them. So they cite kind of brain damage, and as I said earlier, they say that it causes brain damage. They never cite any evidence that it causes brain damage, but they don't say the same thing about nicotine replacement therapy. Interestingly, so you can take nicotine replacement therapy, but you don't seem to get any brain damage. And in fairness, when we say brain damage, let's not be dishonest in this. This is about nicotine and the developing brain. This is not really, I don't think I hear a huge amount about adult smokers and brain damage. So it's usually about young people, how addictive nicotine is and how much the developing brain gets changed. I don't think there's any evidence whatsoever, as far as I can see, to support that contention. Now, if somebody wants to correct me and show me some great evidence, I stand to be corrected, but I haven't seen any good evidence that is the case.
Yeah, it's interesting. Our scientific advisor, Bernd Meyer from the University of Graz, he always brings the example that in Austria, where both of us are from, it's allowed to prescribe NRTs to 13-year-olds. So apparently then nicotine is no problem. But as soon as it gets to vaping, it starts to become a problem. So to be honest, to me, this argument sounds a little bit like we can't find any substantial harm, so we need to find anything else and cling on that, what might be a possible issue. But I think that leads to the most important question. Does vaping and nicotine pouches nowadays, in your experience, do they work as smoking cessation tools or helps? Or is that a thing we tend to bring up as pro-vaping people, but there is not enough evidence for that? What do you think?
Yeah, so I think nicotine pouches are very, very helpful for people. I think the nearest thing, they're not nicotine pouches, of course, is snus in Sweden, which is actually tobacco. Just moistened tobacco in a little pouch. Nicotine pouches are kind of different. It's cellulose, I think, and it's a different thing altogether. I think we really have the great potential. They haven't taken off in Ireland, and of course now the sort of moral crusade brigade are kind of talking about young people getting these in vape shops and stuff like that, and it's terrible and it's awful. There's no evidence that nicotine pouches cause any harm. There's no evidence that nicotine pouches cause oral cancers, even though people will say they do, but I haven't seen any evidence that that's the case. I'm big in favour of it, but unfortunately we don't have a huge amount of experience in Ireland of it because they're not really available for that purpose.
And in your day-to-day experience, when you compare NRTs to vaping, is it similarly effective, or is there a difference in that?
If you look at the Cochrane Review, which is a wide database of all the studies, meta-analysis of all the studies put together, I think you're twice as likely to quit smoking vaping as you are with NRT. That's impressive. Again, completely denied by the people who hate vaping. They don't want to hear that. They don't believe that. They'll talk about dual use and all this sort of stuff, where you vape and you smoke at the same time. I obviously do quite a bit on social media about this, and obviously I I know a lot of the very, very, very expert, far more expert than me, people who kind of, this is their day-to-day work, really. People like Clive Bates and Dr. Farsellino and Colin Mendelsohn, who've just done incredible work. There's so many people, I don't want to leave anybody out. They get terrible criticism on social media by people like Simon Chapman. I think we're all nearly blocked by Simon Chapman in Australia at this stage. He won't engage with anybody, so he just snuffs out completely any dissenting voices. We haven't talked about the Australian model, which, as you know, has gone from the disastrous prescription model to the equally disastrous pharmacy model. Huge black market, people getting prosecuted, smokers not having access to good quality regulated vaping paraphernalia, pods, nicotine, juice, etc. It's a disaster over there. Mark Butler has allowed himself to be manipulated by a very, very coordinated group of people to convince him that Australia is in the grip of a youth vaping epidemic. And of course, which it isn't. Vaping is of all the endeavors kids could get involved in, it's not in the same ballpark as, for instance, drinking, possibly taking drugs, but drinking is the big one I would think of, youth drinking. And of course, the obvious one is youth smoking. Most of the research evidence, if you look at it, has regular vaping among 12 to 17-year-olds as between 1% and 5%. 5% is probably the highest figure. That's daily use or nearly daily use. So that's like dependence, I suppose. And again, it's still not, we're not really sure, well, what impact is that having? Clive Bates makes an excellent point when he says, well, it is possible that those people who are dependent on vaping, that small group of young people, maybe it has a positive benefit because it might actually reduce the risk of them smoking, which is excellent. Which brings me to another point. I mean, I'm going all over many different points here at the moment. It does run counter, doesn't it, to the idea that vaping is a gateway to smoking for young people. Because if you look at the countries where they have a very open border, let's say, approach to and relaxed approach to vaping, have some of the lowest smoking rates across the board, but particularly in young people. So if smoking prevalence is going down, particularly in these countries, where that contradicts the gateway theory. We should be seeing lots of smokers if we're seeing lots of vapers. Again, it's very hard to debate with people who are very, very fixed in their view. I struggle to understand why people would stop people vaping. I mean, look, I don't advocate young people doing any of these things, but if somebody said to me, well, would you prefer a young person vaping every day than smoking every day? No comparison. But you're kind of not allowed to say that, Michael, in a sense. It's sort of, you're almost sounding permissive. I think I live in the real world. So I like to just talk about what the facts of the situation are, not what the moral sort of view is on this. This is not a moral issue. This is, to me, is quite straightforward. This is a health issue. And I just see it as huge, significant harm reduction. Vaping doesn't kill anybody. Is it completely harmless? Well, nothing is good. I mean, this is silly even talking about whether is it completely harmless, because I prescribe lots of medications. I prescribe some medications that in the wrong situation can kill people. We don't talk about the medication's been wrong. We don't talk about the medication's been harmless. Vaping is of several magnitudes lower than that. There's no risk of acute death. That's the first thing. Is over time, could it have an effect on the lungs? Possibly, yes, it could. If you look at it now, it doesn't seem to be that big of a problem. I don't see huge amount of great evidence after we're 22 years in, 23 years into vaping as we know it. It's obviously the technology has been enhanced over the years. I always say to people when they say to me, could you be getting this wrong about vaping? And, you know, down the line, it's going to show that it's cancerous. And I always say, you're missing the point here. I don't care what happens in the future regarding vaping. One thing I know with great certainty, it is immeasurably, never mind 95%, Michael, it is immeasurably safer than inhaling regular, daily, combustible tobacco. There is no comparison, none whatsoever. So I've got my answer already. If down the line they say, yes, you know, there might be something in it that maybe is causing cancer or something, I don't know. It wouldn't change my views, because I know this, many of the people, if not most of the people, if not nearly all of the people who are vaping to give up smoking, do you not think they've tried everything else? Do you not think they've tried nicotine replacement therapy, varenicline, cognitive behavioral therapy, motivational interviewing, counseling of all different types, hypnotherapy? Do you think they haven't tried all those things? So you're looking at people who have smokers who've changed their life. They've changed their life and they've added years onto their life and they've added quality onto their life. I don't really see how this is that complicated. And what I'd also like to say is, I don't think people realize how hard it is, whether you vape, whether you use NRT, or whether you go cold turkey. I don't think people appreciate how hard it is to crack a smoking habit. It really is very, very difficult. You ask any smoker, they'll have tried many times. Some of them just can't manage it. And yet they always aim that at vaping, you know, but they don't aim it at NRT. They always say, oh, it's not successful, or it's dual use. I don't worry about dual use. Dual use to me, it's a spectrum, it's a pathway. And if people are dual using, I guarantee you that they are not dual using to the same extent as they did when they were smoking. And I know that most people will say, look, I vape and I smoke, but I smoke much less. Hopefully in time, I'll completely give up smoking. And who knows, maybe I will continue to give up vaping also. So this is aimed at people. But I get angry sometimes when I listen to this argument of dual use and it doesn't work and all this. The results across the board for smoking are not that great for smoking cessation. They're not great, and it's nothing to do with vaping. It's nothing to do with any method. Although vaping seems to be A, the most popular, and B, the most successful. It's such a hard habit to crack. And this is why I get annoyed also. Why are we putting barriers in the way of people who want to make a quit attempt? It's a gift to want to make a quit attempt. And yet, look what's happening in Australia. It's so distressing.
Yeah, I fully agree with you on that, because I assume you hear that a lot. As a doctor, probably you should recommend smokers to just quit and not use anything or replace one addiction with another addiction. With completely negating it, yeah, it's not that easy. Most people can't just quit and need some help. And apparently vaping or pouches or whatever works is a good help. Maybe one final question. You touched a little bit on this, that when it comes to vaping or nicotine, that when we are discussing policies, or when it's discussed mostly from the anti-vaping side, it's driven a lot of times by morals or ideology, and scientific facts seem not to have any influence on those people. How would you say, can we change that? And especially when we think about consumers who are listening to that, do we as consumers play a role in this as well, and can somehow push the scientific evidence out?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I mean, you've asked some really great questions today across the board, but this is a really great question. The parallels with what we fought for, if you ever listen, I know Alex Wodak many years, and Alex from the same background as I am. We cut our teeth treating heroin users all those years ago. So that's what I do. I'm in a clinic now. There's boxes behind me now. I hope that doesn't ruin your experience. But I'm in actually a community project, and I've worked with heroin users for very, very many years, 26 years actually, and it was great, because the great thing about the job I do in addiction is the first people I treated. Now, you could argue indirectly as a junior doctor, I treated people who came into general practices with alcohol problems. But the first set of people that I had a dedicated service for, that I treated, was harm reduction for heroin use. So we gave needles out, clean paraphernalia, and we gave people opiate substitution treatment. So I was rooted in harm reduction from the very beginning. So as you can imagine, all these years later, which is probably about 15 years later or whatever it was, I couldn't believe when I heard that there was this technology that was really disrupting the tobacco industry. And if anybody wants testament to how disruptive that is, the tobacco industry are now, because they have all the money, are getting more and more and more involved with selling vaping products. And people think that's a bad thing. People seem to think that that is a terrible thing, though they lied to us before. I always say to people, you're not seeing the correct point here. The correct point here is that the tobacco industry realize that the profits for their product are getting dented by vaping, right? So they're getting involved in this. That is a good thing. Tobacco industry should be applauded for getting involved in this. And plus they have all the best money in the world, so they'll have all the best equipment in the world. They'll do it really, really well. The tobacco industry, you can rest assured. But I don't think the tobacco industry would want it on prescription. You might think they would, because maybe more people will smoke. But I think the tobacco industry is a bit different than it was. And I'm not an apologist for the tobacco industry. It's awful and it's terrible. But there'll always be, I know from the illicit drugs world that there will always be a market. If it isn't legal, it'll be illegal. So you can't get away from the popularity of these things. And we see that in Australia. And there is a small but significant bootleg tobacco market. Now, I've gone around the houses, right? But I'll go back to your question, because your question is, what do you do to change the mindset of people? I used to think that maybe both sides could sit down like a war pact and maybe agree on things. I'm around long enough, Michael, to know that that's probably not going to happen. It almost becomes personal, this. I don't make it personal. I mean, I like Simon Chapman, Stanton Glantz, Simon Capewell, all these guys who are very anti-vaping. I'm sure they must be nice people. This isn't a moral view on them, but it's almost got personal about this. They're held. I honestly believe that the problem is that when you look at something like Australia, it reminds me. Australia reminds me. There's a scene in the movie Titanic where everybody is in a panic and they're jumping over to try and get a life ring and get on a lifeboat and escape the sinking ship. And you'll remember this. It's been in every movie. And as it's happening, there is an orchestra playing instruments as the ship is going down. Well, the Australian model reminds me of the Titanic. It's going down in flames and they're still playing their instruments as if nothing is happening. And there's another problem here, and that is that they also are so far in to this disaster and so far in terms of this point of view. This is the human condition. When do you kind of pull back and go, I was wrong? And let me tell you this: if Simon Chapman and Mark Butler tomorrow said, we got this wrong and I want to apologize and we want to put it right, we got it completely wrong, I wouldn't go, I told you so. This is the funny thing. Maybe some people would. I wouldn't. I would applaud anybody. I've seen it in the drugs world. I've seen people who were completely prohibitionists and then they evaluated the evidence and they completely changed their mind. Those people get the greatest degree of admiration from me. So I think they don't understand that. They don't have the awareness, maybe the maturity to look at what is happening here and actually truly evaluate it. They're so fixed in their view and they've convinced themselves that this is the right thing to do. They've got the ear of politicians who are doing the dirty work for them by changing the legislation. And I just think that they're so far in, they couldn't change their mind. There's an arrogance to them. But you should always be open to changing your mind. Always. You mentioned just one point you mentioned there about where do vapers come into this? I think they have a huge role. And to be honest with you, Michael, I think vapers generally are just too quiet about this. Now, I don't know why, because the good news is that unlike many of the addictions, addictions with huge social consequences, there isn't a stigma really to speaking out. There's a bit of stigma to smoking, right? Fair enough, but not really. I mean, you don't get all the stigma and shame in smoking that you get with alcohol, and particularly heroin and cocaine. So I think that the vaping community worldwide, I think, need to come out and really get behind this, because there's a lot of, as you know, there's a lot of great experts around the world producing great research and talking at events and been on social media. They have a lot of support. So I think the vapers, in answer to your question, need to get on board. I'd love to be able to get people to sit around a table and, like, for instance, when I went to the global forum on nicotine in Warsaw in June, I did say to a lot of people, I says, we are guilty here of doing exactly what the other side do, and that is backslapping each other and talking infinite sense, when in actual fact, there's nobody really from the other side who's going to come to these things. I'd have great admiration if Simon Chapman came in. I really would. Now, I mean this sincerely. If Simon Chapman turned up in Warsaw and he said, I'd like to do a speech, even though people might want to throw rotten tomatoes, I would have great admiration for him. Now, look, it's pie in the sky because it's not going to happen. So the idea of us all sitting around the table and trying to bat out a resolution that suits everybody is probably not going to happen. I think really the way this is probably going to play out is, sadly, it's going to become a never bigger disaster in the countries that have, tightened the regulations. And then eventually a new government will come in, and somebody probably will come in who will change it. That's the way it happens with governments. Unfortunately, governments don't tend to change very often. They usually are there for 5 years in Ireland and the UK, 5-7 years. And the problem there is that they put these things into law. I mean, in Ireland, for instance, they're looking at banning disposables, and it looks like they're trying to make inroads into, maybe they're talking about banning some flavors, possibly all flavors, which, as we know, would be a disaster.
Yeah, I mean, I'm pessimistic and optimistic at the same time, because if, I don't know, more than 200 fire bombings in Australia can't change politicians' minds, then it might be hard. But on the other hand, I think we as vapers also need to realize we are also voters. If we look, I looked up the Irish numbers, and I think it's 200,000 vapers or something in a country with 5 million people. And those are adults and all are voters. So I think if we want to scare politicians, we need to show them that actually this is an important issue for us, and that possibly our vote is on the line for them as well. Maybe then they start to listen.
Maybe, yeah. I think eventually, look, I'm always a great believer, Michael, and I know this from the harm reduction world, although it happens slowly. Change does happen, believe it or not. Positive change does happen, but it takes a long, long time. And very, very lucky in the kind of tobacco harm reduction space, and particularly e-cigarette advocacy. Some of the quality of many of the people involved in this, both from a consumer point of view, a expert point of view, and also who often get very bad press, and I don't know why. The industry can't be left out of this either. I mean, it's easy to criticize the industry, but the industry are providing a service. They're the people who are both going to make these products. That's part of the industry, and also sell these products. We need them. They need to be on side. I hate when industry are told, "Oh, your industry, I'm not talking to you." Politician, your industry, I'm not talking to you. It's just appalling. That's yes, we're industry. We're making these products to sell them. Yes, it's a business for us. Of course, it's a business, but do you level the same thing at pharmaceutical industry? I'm sure many of the doctors don't.
Or criticizing Shell for switching to renewable energy or something like that. At Climate COP, you don't hear that. It's just with nicotine. So we are already a little bit over time. So I would like to bring it to an end. Maybe you tell listeners and viewers how they can reach you or where they can find you. We will link those things then in the description as well.
So my Twitter handle or X is addictions PMC at addictions PMC. So I can send that to you after. I've got a LinkedIn profile. If you put in Dr. Garrett McGovern, you pretty much get me. And I also have an email address, which I can provide also. You've got my email address. You're quite willing for you to do that. So you get, I don't know if where you know my Twitter handle, don't you? I think you
yeah. We will link it.
I think X and also LinkedIn. I put a bit of stuff up on LinkedIn because LinkedIn is quite good for academic stuff, and all that thing. Just put in LinkedIn, put my name in, and you'll get me.
Personally, I can recommend everyone your X account, especially if you're a fellow Manchester United fan, then it's a bit mixed with not so serious stuff and even more depressing stuff.
Well, that is a more serious sort of issue. It feels like Man United have been overtaken by anti-vaping people.
Exactly.
Just feel that way, I have to say. But look, as many of my fans who are a similar age to me will testify, we had it good for a long, long time. For probably 20 years, Manchester United had it really good. There's a strange, perverse pleasure to watching what's happening now, believe it or not. I can die happy about what United have achieved. They're still a big club in kind of they're running through hard times. But yeah, you know from my ex that I tend to post stuff on Man United as well. I'm a diehard United fan. I have been since I was 8 years of age. You must remember, by the way, the Liverpool were the big team, so they had it good for about 20 years. We had it good for 20 years, and now Manchester City are having it good for 10 years. And Manchester City, if they keep going the way they're going, will they've already won 7 Premier League titles since Manchester United won none of them.
Let's see what happens. Maybe they get relegated as well. If we are lucky.
Possible.
Yeah. No, thank you again for your time. It was a great pleasure. And we are very thankful for your work you do and for speaking out all the time. Thank you again and all the best.
Listen, great to talk to you, Michael. It's an absolute pleasure. You look after yourself. Have a lovely weekend. See ya.
Take care.